All right. Another day, another podcast. Let's roll with it. All right, here we go. All right, here's a story from Colorado. I really like this story. I hope you guys enjoy it. Here's what the writer says. I grew up in Colorado, and I'm a proud member of the Mescalero Apache tribe. I grew up hunting elk, deer, and bear in the mountains. But I've had the privilege of hunting all over the United States. I served 8 years as an infantryman in the U.S. Army, and I have 3 tours in the box. I've seen all sorts of things that would be hard to explain for anyone, but I'd like to focus this letter on the events that happened right here in my home state. Growing up as a backcountry hunter and fisherman, I always strive to get off the beaten path. Our elk camp is a 6-mile walk, and we hunt even further than that. My father and grandfather had a lot of stories that we would talk about around the wood stove in our outfitter tent, and I would hang on to every word of the stories because I thought that's just what they were, stories, until I got older. One story that sticks out was one about a cow elk my grandfather shot in a snowstorm. Grandpa hit her a little further back in the body than he would have liked, and she ran a ways before they even picked up a blood trail, so they gave her some time to die. It was easy to track in the fresh powder, though. They followed the tracks 400 yards through the scrub oaks into the back of a drainage where they found the imprint in the shape of an elk, and the tracks stopped. What they saw there scared the hell out of my grandfather. There were big tracks with long strides that looked like something walking in bare feet, coming down the ridge and onto the shelf, and then they went back up the ridge. Whatever this thing was, it had taken the elk and carried it back up the ridge. And that's one of my grandfather's stories, but here's mine. I was hunting with my father 5 miles from where the last story took place. My father was a retired recon Marine scout sniper. He was a Vietnam vet as well as a veteran of Desert Storm and other conflicts. The 3rd day of the hunt, we walked into a large draw. Dad went up into the black timber and then eventually broke out into a large boulder field on top. I went up the other side that overlooked a large meadow surrounded by aspen, and I could see my father 100 yards from the top of the ridge and 1,000 yards from me as the crow flies. He was 300 feet above my elevation. Later in the day, I was daydreaming, not really paying attention to my surroundings, when I heard a thump to my left. And then I heard the report of a rifle. Well, I instantly came out of the daze that I was in, and I started looking around frantically. I thought someone was shooting at me. And then there was another thump. This time I saw the round hit the ground in the same spot. I looked through my rifle scope at my dad, who was still in the same spot, and he was pointing to my left. I looked over that way, and I froze. 50 yards away and up that incline stood a Sasquatch. Dad watched it come in on me. I never noticed it. It was covered in black and reddish hair, and it looked at me with a young and curious face with beautiful amber-colored eyes. It was most certainly a female standing 7 feet tall. She was staring right at me, not in a threatening way. Maybe she had never seen a person. We stared at one another for a while, and she would watch my movements, turning and cocking her head. She was mimicking me. I finally backed away down the draw, and I met my father at the trail. We didn't talk about it much, but when I asked him why he didn't shoot her, he said he wasn't sure his 7 mag had the power that it would take to put her down in her tracks. That he wanted to draw my attention to the creature while he had her in his scope. If she had made an aggressive move toward me, he had my back. But instead of shooting and seeing that she seemed non-threatening, he just watched through the scope as we interacted. I have other encounters if you'd like to read them. Oh, this guy's name is Cam. He's same name as me, and he's a Mescalero Apache in Colorado. Now, you've already heard all that. But yes, if you have other encounters, this was fantastic. It sounds like you have real interesting things happen to you, brother. I'd love to read them. So if you have time, just send me more emails. And I don't want you to take time out of your work day or, I don't want anyone to feel like they're wasting their time on this. I know there's a lot of stories out there that I haven't got to, and I'm doing my best to get to all of them. And if you'll just hang tight, I'm going to get to them. But I read them all, and it's just a matter of time. That's all it is. So, brother, if you have time to write more encounters, I would love to get them. I really would. And I appreciate you sending this one. It was great. Hey, y'all, real quick, I wanted to let you know that Yeti Bars has a big sale going on. It's 15 to 20% off on most items. I think probably all items. I just cracked open one of my bars of the Glacier bar. I've really grown to like that bar. I like the color of it. I like the scent. It's probably third down from the Dixie bar or the Hippie #1. If I want a real strong smell that day, I use one of the top two, the Dixie or the Hippie. If I want a slighter scent during the day, I use the Glacier bar. So they have some soaps that have real strong scents and some that have mild scents. But the Dixie and the Hippie #1 are pretty strong. The Shroot, the Glacier, Lemonade Stand, and most of the others are just a subtle scent that I think you would enjoy all the time. And then I lotioned up with their salve. And oh man, what I love about that salve is it doesn't feel oily on my skin. It moistens your skin like I have dry, flaky skin. And it fixes all that for the day. And I don't feel oily and greasy all day. So I love their products. Go check them out at YetiBars.net or Yeti Bars on Facebook. Use the code DC10 at checkout and get an additional 10% off the already discounted products. You won't be sorry. All right, y'all, this is really good. Hang on to your weaves. This is really interesting, really interesting. Here's what the writer says. He's anonymous. He didn't say he wanted to be anonymous, but he didn't say I could use his name, so I'm just not going to do it. But he'll know his story when he hears it. My story started many years ago in northern Minnesota. Being a hardened Minnesotan, I don't know how to say that. Minnesotan is one of my attributes that I wear proudly. Growing up in the harsh North Woods, I often think of the encounters I experienced as a young man growing up. However, not until the last 5 or so years did I realize what I encountered. I met my wife 35 years ago, and I married her. In all those years, I let her know of my strange, yet unverified, happenings in the woods. She would say, just lay off the bourbon. It wasn't uncommon for me to take my leave of her and venture out into the deep woods for quite some time. Camping is my passion, and I did it often. Moving to Wisconsin in 1990, we started our family, and I've been blessed with a son and a daughter, and are very close to me and my wife. Both my kids are avid outdoors people, and we get to experience nature as it was meant to be. After careful consideration, I've decided to share my most recent experience that makes me think that these creatures of the forest are not only here, but mean us no harm. I'll begin by saying that my thoughts on Bigfoot are met with hardcore evidence that they truly are real. My son and I are active and hardcore hunters. That being said, we often abandon all other activities when hunting season is open. Last spring, 2019, my son and I were camping on private land in western Wisconsin. The landowner lets us do whatever we want in exchange for chores that need to be done on the property. Prior to my last encounter, may I say that not only has my son and my daughter, and yes, my wife, have not only seen our hairy creature, but have come to enjoy the gifting process that we have started with them. Hunting this property, we have experienced and become somewhat comfortable with the sightings and gifting of our hairy friends. I am blessed that my daughter, wife, and son have gotten to experience what I have. At first, we were terrified of what we saw and experienced, but over time, though, we realized that they mean us no harm, as long as we respect their space. It was May of last year, and my son and I were turkey hunting on a spring hunt. We set up camp in what we call the Bottoms. It's 300 acres of woods, and it's our playground, and wild game is plentiful. The landowner dropped by with his wife, and we drank and relaxed by a fire deep into the evening. We already had 3 days of camping under our belts and had some interesting things happen. It was Friday afternoon, and we saw turkeys, but none were close enough to harvest. We headed back to camp, and the landowner showed up and brought bourbon and chicken quarters for the open fire. Strumming my guitar and feasting on campfire chicken and having a relaxing evening, they left around 10:30 and drove back to Madison. My son and I stayed up drinking and singing to my guitar when I noticed something strange in the darkness. Just out of the light of the fire, one could make out an outline of 2 beings in the distance. I reached over and tapped my son, and I pointed in the direction of what I was seeing. "Holy shit, Dad, there they are." "Yep," I said. "Are you scared?" "No," he said. "I think they're like playing, if that's possible," as he laughed. Well, around midnight, we decided that it was time for bed, so we retired to the tent. Getting up to go hunting at 4:30 would come pretty quick. Before going to bed, I went to potty behind the tent, and the creatures were gone, so I climbed into my sleeping bag, and it was a wonderful end to the day. One of the many nights my son and I have camped in these woods, it became obvious that we had company. It was only after many nights that we realized that our forest friends would always let us know that they were there. It was spooky and comforting at the same time, and let me say that after getting used to it, we slept pretty well. Prior to retiring, we stoked the fire with wood, so we had a fire in the morning, and I naturally wake up early, and even though we stayed up late, I would be up at my normal time of 3:30 or so making coffee and breakfast. But I didn't that morning. I was perhaps really tired as I slept until 5 a.m., but it wasn't me that woke up. Something outside the tent pushed me out of my cot. The push was powerful and firm, and I sprang awake and I reached over to my son, and he was there, and I said, "Get up, man, it's late," and I ran out to see if I could see who or what had pushed me out of my bed. My son said, "Dad, what's got you all wound up?" And I told him what had just happened. Well, he laughed and he said, "Well, they probably know what our schedule is and they woke you up." I took comfort in that as it made sense. I went on to make coffee, and being late as turkeys were already out of their roost, we ate breakfast and decided to say screw it and just hang out at camp. But what happened next is something that I will always remember. We were planning on camping another 2 days, so we were running low on eggs and bacon. And so we jumped in my truck and we drove the 10 miles into town to get what we needed. We got back to camp around 9:30 a.m., and what we saw was simply amazing. There was a huge tom laying next to the table where the camp stove was, and its neck was broken. "Well, I'll be damned, he gifted us a turkey," I said. "How freaking cool is that?" Our excitement was overwhelming, and we shouted "thank you" out into the woods. And even though it was now 10 a.m., we both took a shot of wild turkey, still in disbelief, and decided to gift them with some eggs and bacon. I cooked up a batch and put it on a paper plate and walked over to our gifting site, and I left it there. Shortly thereafter, we heard a whoop, and it was loud and close, and I smiled and I said, "Well, it's safe to say they got our gift." And I walked over to the gifting site about 300 yards away, and the plate was gone and in its place was a shiny, speckled rock. It's not the first time that we've been gifted rocks, and for whatever reason, they seem to gift back with rocks. Well, that's our story. Yes, I know some of you will find it unbelievable, but everything I've said is true. I know for sure if people would put down their phones and reconnect with nature, one never knows what may happen. Most respectfully, and he does give his name here, and he, again, I'm not going to say it, but anyway, this is a great story. You know, most of the stories I get are pretty, I use the word benign, but they're not exciting. They're not aggressive. We do some of those. We do some of the action type stories. But I really like these stories where people actually get along with them. I don't know. It gives me just a little bit of peace, and to know that if these things are out there, most of them are not wanting to, hurt us. And I've got hundreds of stories, and I actually did an interview with a guy on a podcast. I'll announce it when it comes out. He's got a really good podcast. I was telling him, I said, of all even the violent encounters that I get, nobody ever gets hurt. I've only had one story. I've got over 300 videos up, 2, 3, 4 stories in every video, and only one of them where someone has actually been killed. And who knows, But I mean, for the most part, everyone survives these encounters. So if you ever run into one, your chances, if you go by all these stories that I read, your chances of survival are really good. Take that as a grain of salt. I'm just saying that's what I'm seeing in all these letters that I get. So thanks to the writer for sending it. I'm glad you sent it. It was an uplifting story, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, sir. The writer of this email wants to be anonymous, but she's written a good story, and she's having some good experiences. And here's what she writes. I've lived at the foot of this mountain in southeast Oklahoma for 20 years. In all that time, I've seen these critters twice, but I've heard them many times. They howl and whoop and chatter, or they make a bird sound, which, if it were a bird, it would have to be the size of a house to make a sound that loud. They eat the pears off my trees, but they always bring me one with no marks on it. They leave me a perfect pear. They lay it in the same spot in my driveway every time where I can see it from the porch when I have my morning coffee. And if they're out to hurt me, they've had ample opportunity to do so. The first time I saw one was when I glanced out my bedroom window as I was walking down the hall. There it was, a face looking in the window. I could tell it was a young one. It was gray with large eyes, and when it registered what I had seen, I stepped back to look again, but it was gone. The second time I saw one, I was putting clothes in my washing machine, and I glanced out the window above the washer. This one was very shiny black, and I think it may have just been in the pond that's farthest away from my home. I don't know for sure, but I know it was not a bear. A few days later, my husband and I walked out to where I saw it and measured him beside a small tree that I saw it walk behind. The tree came to the hairy person's waist, and when my husband walked behind that tree, it was over his head. My husband is 6 feet tall. The hairy person must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. My point is they are here, and they are real. There is simple proof out there. They are not a great ape. DNA has been tested and then tested some more. They do have bodies. The question we should be asking is why the government is trying to keep them a secret from the American people. They are not a joke or a sit around the campfire scary story. They are real. The DNA shows them to be a human hybrid. Every American should be asking our government to let people know about them. Why all the secrets? Is it the money or is it something else? And after all these years, the government has finally come out and said, yes, there are UFOs. We Americans have known that for years. We benefited from that secret. Who benefits from this one? Voices united make a mighty roar. And that's the end of her email. And I agree. If these things are real, and the government knows about it and they have bodies and there's been DNA testing that shows they are a human hybrid, then, why not just make it clear? I don't, that subject is so deep. I just can't even begin to think about it because I don't know. I'm just busy. People with less busy minds can probably think about that and maybe come up with some theories. And all they are is theories. All we have is ideas. Unless the government comes out or some school or college or whoever would be a reputable, give a reputable representation of the species, until they come out and actually show the evidence, a body, whatever, then we're just never going to know. We're not going to know. But this was interesting. I like that it's 2 stories in a row where there's gifting going on. I don't think she's gifting them, but they're leaving her a pair in her driveway. That's pretty cool. Thank you, ma'am, for the story. I really appreciate it. Let's move on to another one. Here's a story from East Tennessee, and the writer's name is James, and here's what he writes. I grew up in a small rural community in eastern Tennessee. We're located on I-75, equal distance between Knoxville and the Kentucky state line. Although I don't remember the exact years of these encounters, I'm now 56. I must have been around 14 or 15 when the first incident occurred. My mom and dad were friends with a family that lived up the road from us. They had several boys, the youngest of them being about my age. When we were at their house, we would hang out with the boy who was my age and his 2 brothers who were a little bit older. We'd swim and hunt and hike and do whatever we thought was fun to do at any given moment. Meanwhile, my dad had a drinking buddy and my mom had a friend to talk to. One day, their youngest son and I were out wandering around the mountain above his house and doing what teenage boys do when we came across an abandoned strip mine. We were walking along what had once been a road, and we came to a pile of dirt that was 12 feet high. It had deliberately been placed there to keep vehicles out. These days, it wouldn't have stopped an ATV, but back then ATVs were unheard of. We were 15 feet from the roadblock when my buddy told me to go on ahead. He had to take a dump. Yes, that's the way people do it. If you gotta go, you gotta go, and you just go right there in the woods. I've done it many times. Since I had no desire to watch that, I kept walking. And about the time I put my foot on the huge pile of dirt, something on the other side of it roared. It was a kind of loud, tooth-rattling, angry roar that told me that this thing was big and it was pissed. I passed my buddy who was running with his pants still around his knees, and I jumped over the bank from the road and didn't stop till I got back to his house a mile away. My buddy did a pretty good job of keeping pace, even with his pants not quite fastened. No one wanted to believe us when we told our story. We never did see anything, so in truth, it could have been a bear. And this area isn't known for bears, though, and I've hunted and searched for ginseng in these mountains all my life, and I've never once seen any sign of a bear, not once. But we didn't see anything, so a bear can't be ruled out entirely. And I can't speak for my buddy, but I never ventured back up there again. It was a couple of years after that, and some 25 miles away, when I was out ginseng hunting one morning with 2 of my dad's brothers. One was my age, so maybe 16 or 17 at the time, and the other was a few years younger. We were allowed to go into the woods by ourselves, but the only weapons we carried would have been something to dig the ginseng with and maybe a pocket knife. The area we were in was called Clinchmore. I don't remember if we had much luck that day, but we were on our way back to their house, my mama and papa's house. As a crow flies, it wasn't that far, but we were going to have to walk almost a mile further down the little creek that we were following and cross a bridge to our left and then turn back in the direction from where we were coming on the opposite ridge. I argued that we should go up the ridge and down the other side and then we'd be home in half the time. My younger uncle was all for that, but my older uncle said that it would put several more ridges between us and home, thus making the walk a lot longer. Today I know he was right, but on that day, I could not be persuaded to follow that stream any further. My older uncle was just as determined to stay his course, and after a few more minutes of arguing, we kept on walking down the creek while my younger uncle and I started up the small dry wash that fed the water off the ridge into the creek after a rain. On that day, there hadn't been any rain, so it was dry, and climbing up the wash from rock to rock was pretty easy. We made it 100 yards up that ridge when the same thing happened again that happened to me and my friend. Something big and angry roared at us. It sounded like it was maybe 50 feet ahead of us, but we never saw anything. Then again, we didn't stop to look. We just turned and did our best not to break our necks as we flew back down the wash. My older uncle was several hundred feet down the creek when we caught up with him. His distance from us and the creek splashing and gurgling alongside him drowned out any chance of him hearing what we had heard. And we told him about it, but he just laughed and called us liars. He said we made it up because we realized that he was right and didn't want to own up to it. Again, I admit that it could have been a bear, but again, that area is not known for bears. In all my years, I've never seen a single track or any sign of a bear in that area. So was it a Bigfoot? I don't know, but if it was, he probably got a good laugh both times as he watched us running for our lives. Just as an afterthought, when I was very young, my pawpaw owned a farm where he grew enough food to raise a very large family. And he and my mama had 14 kids, and my dad was the oldest boy. The farm probably wasn't as large as I remember it. I was only 10 or 11 when they sold it and moved up the road, but as a child, it felt like it was huge. Beside the normal crops, they raised a large garden and canned most of it for later use. Pawpaw raised pigs and chickens, and he had a couple of horses. He even owned a mule that my dad used for plowing. On the side, I think he and my dad made a bit of shine to make ends meet. The farm bordered a river on one side, but past the river was miles and miles of wilderness. And as for their side of the river, except for an occasional house, there wasn't much. Across an old swing bridge that isn't there anymore was a small settlement of 15 houses and a church. There were no stores outside of one little place that sold bare essentials, and the entire area was sparsely populated. On the farm, we kids would often venture out toward the back of the house to play, and when we'd get a little too close to the woods, my ever-watchful Mama would stick her head out the back door and warn us not to go into those woods. "That old hairy man will get you," she'd say. That old hairy man. And I always wondered where the idea of a hairy man came from. I never thought to ask until it was too late to do so. And that's the end. That's a great story. And this whole podcast has been kind of filled with these good, kind of nostalgic stories, people looking back or people gifting, having good experiences with Bigfoot. These aren't the podcasts that get all the views, but these are some of the stories that I really love. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really appreciate you hanging with me this long, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks again.